Welcome, friends and comrades, to another interview segment hosted by the Midwestern Marx Institute for Marxist Theory and Political Analysis. Today we'll be talking with Didier Ortiz about the situation in Peru. Didier is a political analyst and Marxist-Leninist based in South Florida. Didier is an affiliate of the national political party Peru Libre and a member of the Troika Collective and Los Ronderos de las Redes. For those that don't know, Peru has undergone a coup d'etat against the constitutionally elected president Pedro Castillo, who has been illegally detained under what they're calling a 18-month preventive detention. Since these events in December 7th, there has been a nationwide unrest, with the coup president Dina Boluarte declaring on the 14th of December a state of emergency. As of today, there has been an 11-day general strike where the police have killed at least 48 people and where journalists on the ground have been attacked and repressed. So we're going to be talking about all of this with Didier. Thank you for coming on, comrade.
Thank you for having me. Today Peru is again facing another one of its major struggles, right? To realign politics along the people's power. Of course, it can be a convoluted story, so I'm very glad to be here and to clear all that up. The Western media is being frankly fake news media as always. The day of the parliamentary coup, Insider Edition put out a small clip, and they said, "Oh, protesters are out to protest Castillo," and it literally said, "Cierre el Congreso," close Congress. What Castillo is trying to do.
Right. It's systematic misinformation, what we get here in the West. I want to start off by showing some images. I want to highlight that maybe some of these will be graphic. So there's your warning, folks.
Very, very graphic, unfortunately, yes.
But is the screen showing?
Yes.
Okay, there we are. I think I froze there for a bit. So this is what's going on here in Peru. This is a video from Gustavo Petro, president of Colombia. The people are in the streets by the masses. This was on the 11th of January. Here you have people, a video of people screaming, now yes, guerra civil, so civil war. Some of the protesters have been phrasing the activities as a civil war of sorts. If you speak Spanish, you can tell that what they're saying is "Ahora sí, guerra civil."
Yeah. I want to make one point about that, comrade, because when Evo Morales was couped, that same chant was very prominent in La Paz, throughout Bolivia, and that recording is from Puno. It's right next to Bolivia, right? Their same spirit carried over just across the border. I think that's important to note, the revolutionary element in the South, in the deepest parts of the South, right?
Absolutely. This is more videos from Arequipa. Here we have some videos with, I believe some of the flags here are from one of the communist parties of Peru. And the last thing I wanted to show was the sort of bullets that are being used by the police. This tweet is from a few days ago. At the time, there was 46 people that had died. The last stats that I saw were 48, and those were, I believe, from yesterday, so I'm sure it's more now. The sorts of bullets that they're using are the ones that open up, and they cause a hell of a lot more damage. So yeah, that's I wanted to start by showing the people that, but Didier, can you give us a little bit of the context of how it was that we got here, maybe starting in December 7th and the constitutional attempt on the part of Pedro Castillo to dissolve the Congress, and then the reaction with the coup d'etat?
So to start on December 7th, I think it has its merits, and I will because you asked me to, but it almost makes very little sense, right? On December 7th, the president of Peru, Pedro Castillo, woke up and decided to give a message to the nation in which he said, with shaking hands, that he wanted to close down Congress and to restructure the judicial system and the various other organs of the Peruvian state, that there would be a curfew installed, and that he would rule by decree for several months until a new Congress is elected with the power to write a new constitution. He was arrested the same day. He was brought into custody that same day by his own patrol, by his own so-called protectors. And the Peruvian government was taken over thoroughly, now officially, by the Fujimori mafia. People started protesting little by little, little by little, and little by little, but then it grew into a majority of people that are opposed to the coup government. And throughout all that time, people have been killed by the Peruvian state. But there's a lot of questions that come from that, right? Why would Pedro Castillo do this now? Why is Congress so unpopular? Why didn't the same amount of people that came out, let's say last week, come out the day that Pedro Castillo was arrested? So there's a lot of questions that do come up, and I do hope to answer. But the simplest way to put it is that the parliament did a coup to a president who was acting under, we would call, very suspicious, very complex circumstances.
That's very well said. Yeah, I wanted to just dig into the immediate situation, just to give people a quick and perhaps abstract picture of what's going on, and then roll back to the historical context. Because in order to understand something correctly, a series of facts in front of you, you have to understand the factors that allowed those facts to come into existence. So where would you like to start the story? I know you can go way back. I tend to think that maybe around the Velasco, the time of Velasco's what's called sometimes a popular revolution in '68, where he gets overthrown by a coup d'etat in '75. That might be a good place to start. But take it away wherever you think might be a good place for people to understand that context.
I feel like one factor that we should understand, and that is very, unreported, is the Peruvian left, the Peruvian revolutionary movement, right? We usually focus on Fujimorismo and on the Velasco government, which is really good, I think, to understand Peru, but we're always missing the revolutionary movement. So apart from the Sino-Soviet split, the Peruvian communist movement was united solidly for a while, for several decades. As you know, Peru never had a social democratic party. They just had the Socialist Party that became the Communist Party within a couple of years. So, skipping over the Sino-Soviet split, which is very important, but, putting that aside, one of the things that defined the fractures in the Peruvian revolutionary movement was indeed the revolutionary government of General Velasco, right? General Velasco took over through a coup in 1968, and one of the biggest mandates that he had was to perform or to lead an agrarian reform, which of course had its ups and downs. It was ultimately, objectively, a positive thing, because back in before 1968, 90% of the land in Peru was owned by a few families, by like 10 families. And those 10 families are now united into a confederation called the Confier. So it's like the 10 oligarchic families that ran all of Peru are still in many ways running Peru. So the Velasco government fractured or helped put into sharp focus the existing contradictions within the Peruvian revolutionary left. Among them, how do we deal with the state that is in favor of an agrarian revolution when this one also abuses the people? I don't want to get lost in the weeds of the inside baseball of the Peruvian left, but we'll put it this way. The agrarian reform brought into sharp relief contradictions within the peasantry. One of the, in my opinion, one of the biggest, perhaps, blunders of the Peruvian revolutionary left, and here I'm going to perhaps sound a little controversial, is Shining Path's or Abimael Guzman's belief that he should lead a people's war in the 1980s. Over 10 years after the agrarian reform. The agrarian reform made it so that a 90% majority, right, an overwhelming majority of Peruvians who had no land, who had no rights, now had some land, and some had some rights, and some had more rights than others. Rich peasants came into being. Andean kulaks came into being. Many of the cooperatives that were developed through the agrarian reform to have these peasants manage the land, they lost their revolutionary spirit and they closed down their membership, right? Instead of growing in membership, the cooperatives would close down their membership, would make it exclusive, and they would only hire people and exploit them as rural workers, right? So instead of expanding the ownership of the land and the people's participation in developing that land for the national economy, you had a class of kulaks basically exploiting other Andean peasants, now ever poorer peasants in rural Peru. And the situation accelerated the process by which people would move to Lima. Lima today has 1/3 of all the Peruvians. 1/3. That means that it not only is it too big to exist in a practical way, it means that there's a marginalized sector that surrounds the city, that has no access to water, that has no access to formal jobs, that has no access to other services, including even the police. There's places in Lima that the state does not reach, Lima being a metropolitan capital. So I say all this to underscore the forces that then come into being in the Fujimorista state. The Shining Path committed many errors. It responded to the contradictions in the countryside with a lot of violence. There's a lot of things to be said about what the state did in black ops, if you will, right, in clandestine operations, and that's very fair. I'm not gonna get into all that, but to me, it is very clear that the Shining Path made a mistake of ultra leftism, of not knowing how to handle the contradictions within the people, and ultimately acting against the people's interests, and that gave the way for Fujimori, a dark horse candidate, from being able to do a coup and overthrowing the 1979 Constitution. Why should we underscore this moment? After Velasco got ill, he was couped by General Bermudez, his second in hand, and he became a right-wing dictator, a military right-wing dictator who reversed many of the reforms that Velasco had put forward. My father was part of the generation of college students that fought against the Bermudez dictatorship and was able to attain a constituent assembly, which was in its majority left, which was led by Victor Raúl Aya de la Torre, who was the leader of the APRA, the American Revolutionary People's Alliance. And so this constitution represented a progressive step forward in bourgeois democracy in Peru. And Sendero, of course, was opposed to it. And they bombed voting locations during the elections. So you can tell that there was already this difficult situation for so-called Peruvian democracy throughout. Fujimori comes in 10 years later, gets elected. 2 years afterwards, does a self-coup in which the army closes down Congress, and he imposes a new constitution. Right? There is no referendum. Should we have a new constitution? No, he said, we're going to have a new constitution, and we'll have this, how can I put it, elected, but very much sold out constituent assembly that crafted a neoliberal, how can I put it, a neoliberal rag that simply legitimized a coup and gave much power to the president, which was a huge inconvenience to the Fujimoristas when Pedro Castillo became president, because he had almost the power of a dictatorial despot. In theory, his powers were taken away every month, bit by Congress. And so to bring it in, I guess, to the current situation, Pedro Castillo is fighting the Fujimorista state, which was legitimized by the Constitution of 1993. Even though Fujimori he, was expelled, or rather he was ousted from power. He escaped to Japan. He, what do you call it? He turned in his resignation through fax. At that moment, 90% of the Fujimoristas said, I'm not a Fujimorista anymore. But they still believe the same things, and they still do the same things. Fujimorismo, beyond being any ideology or political movement, is a criminal organization. That's how many state attorneys, or rather, the people's attorneys, if you will, how they characterize the Fuerza Popular Party as a criminal organization. And Keiko Fujimori is the leader of that criminal organization.
That's very interesting. One of the things that I've read is that the scope of the agrarian reforms that were done under Velasco, the only ones that were that deep in Latin America before had been the ones in Cuba. He had began to align himself with Cuba. He had begun to trade with the Soviet Union, and it was quite radical, a very radical form of left-wing nationalism. Peruanismo is what it was called, I believe. Can you elaborate a little bit on what happened to Castillo? I haven't been able to follow him very much over the last year, but when he was in the process of getting elected, I remember that there was this general aura that there had been a documentary that had been just released. Let me see if I can remember.
About the agrarian reform, right?
Yeah, that La Revolución en la Tierra, the revolution in land, which brought this idea that various left-wing Peruvian scholars had tarried with it, which is that there have been three major social transformations in Peru. The first is the colonial transformation, the expropriation of the indigenous by the Spaniards. The second one was the Republican anti-colonial revolutions, which were primarily led by criollos, and which established a sort of criollo republic that was, very much racist but progressive in its advancement beyond the colonial conditions. And then the third one was Velasco, and these folks had painted the movement that Castillo was doing as a sort of continuation or a finishing of the almost like a new democratic process that Velasco had started. But what ended up happening with Castillo?
I will say this. I think that interpretation is in variation with Mariateguismo, right, which sees the colonial republic or the aristocratic republic as being a force against progress and against advancement. Yes, it's true that having a bourgeois republic is better than being a colony, basically, of Spain, a viceroyalty of Spain. It is 100% true. But the fact of the matter is that the meaning of the Peruvian Republic is still being debated. Simón Bolívar said the Aborigines will now be called Peruvians. Peruvian then has a meaning of being the indigenous people of Peru and not the Lima minority, which has ruled Peru ever since Simón Bolívar left office as president of Peru. So I think that with the agrarian reform is where you see a real step towards that new Peru. Pedro Castillo is a product of the agrarian reform. He could not have been president. He could not have been a leader of anything had it not been for that reform. Pedro Castillo led a 3-month-long nationwide teacher strike in 2017. And he came into the national spotlight through that. He couldn't do that as a illiterate peasant that didn't know Spanish and had no education and had no way of being part of a national organization, not being considered a person. So I think that agrarian reform definitely is key in the scene that we're in now. Pedro Castillo wanted to continue that. He was using that aura of the agrarian reform. Has that been a successful project? I don't think so. The thing is that to have a second agrarian reform does mean to fight for sovereignty and against imperialism. One of the biggest challenges that Castillo would have faced if he had stayed in office would have come in 2023, because this year, many of the contract laws that the Peruvian state is tied to with international corporations would have to be renegotiated. A contract law, according to the Constitution of 1993, is a law that the state makes with international corporations that cannot be messed with by Congress. It has the same level of legality as the constitution. So Peru is the only country in the world that by law it says this contract with a foreign entity is the same as the Peruvian constitution. It has the same value, it has the same sanctity, it has the same importance, and the same power over the people. And so Pedro Castillo, in many ways, knew that he was probably not going to be allowed to operate as president. He would have been inhabilitated at some point in the beginning of this year. That's one of the reasons why he moved to close Congress. But we have to also underscore the legality of what that means. So there's many demands right now made by the people. Among them, of course, is to free Castillo and to put him back in office. That group of people that want that in particular are not the majority. The majority of people want Dina Boluarte to get out of office and for there to be new elections to elect some new leadership. But the Castillo supporters are a hardcore group of people, about 20% of the country, that have been fighting to the teeth for Castillo. And not only for that, for the restitution of the Constitution of 1979 and a new Constituent Assembly. That is very important to note. For example, if you ask the caviar left, right, these people who think that they should rule Peru because they went to a fancy college and speak a foreign language, those people will say, of course, we need a Constituent Assembly, we need to have a modern constitution, and so on, right? But the South, the rural, mining, agricultural South says we need to return to the Constitution of 1979 because that is the legal basis for what Castillo did on December the 7th, which is to close down Congress because they were acting in illegality because the Constitution of 1993 is illegal. The reason why the South also claims this is because they already know what's coming when the Peruvian Revolution is able to take power over the state fully and say goodbye to the contract laws. There will be an economic war against Peru. There will be sanctions against Peru. There will be lawsuits against Peru. Right now, I believe this international collecting agency is attacking Cuba in London through the court system in London through a lawsuit. And the South knows that's going to happen to Peru too. So they say, no, we completely reject the legality of the Constitution of 1993 and the contract laws. They are null and void. We are not paying you anything. We don't owe you anything because guess what? Thieves sold you what was mine. It says if somebody stole my cell phone and sold it to somebody else and that person says, oh, well, but it's my cell phone now. No, that was stolen. You bought stolen property.
Very well said. I'd like that you highlight the contradictions between the sort of cosmopolitan Lima left. I remember that was one of the central things that we were focusing on when the choice was between Peru Libre and Juntos por Peru during the election. And some of the debates, we have one of our writers, he teaches at Pontifical Catholic University in Peru.
La Católica, yeah.
And he got into into a back and forth debate with one of the Juntos por Peru people who was just calling Castillo, the resentment left. And it was very much a condescending and patronizing, middle class left critique. Can you talk a little bit though about what happened to Castillo? Because there was so many radical demands. I mean, Peru was being hit by the pandemic harder than any other country. The mortality rates were the highest in the world. And he said that to battle that, he was going to develop the universal health care. He didn't say that he was going to expropriate anyone, but he said that he was going to crack down on monopolies that were, price gouging and doing things that affected people. And he was very much radical. And he started by inputting in important positions of governance people from Peru Libre. He had even flirted with the idea of making the ronderos the people that ran the Ministry of Interior, so the defense of Peru. What ended up happening? I remember there was a lot of attacks from this right-wing Congress right from the start that wanted to put him out. But did he sell out at some point, or can you give us a little bit of the context for outsiders?
Certainly. Well, you mentioned the caviar left, and the caviar left was key in this situation, in this unfolding. So here's the thing about it, right? When before the 2021 elections, Peru Libre was a regional based party in the inner Peru, or the deep Peru, as they say over there, El Perú Profundo. So it was a Quechua speaking agricultural or miner base party, right? So a lot of its membership are very humble people who work for a living. They are miners, they are peasants, maybe they are some form of informal workers, and so on. When Peru Libre with Pedro Castillo wins the first round, you have all these opportunists, and I could name names and throughout the whole night. But you had all these opportunities to say, well, you know what? I've been to Columbia University. Well, you know, I speak 3 languages. Well, you know, I went to Humboldt University in Germany, and so on and so on. I should lead these different agencies of the Peruvian state, right? But I mean, Arrondero, they're cool, but you know, I studied like global defense, right, at the Harvard School of Government. So shouldn't I be enough in these positions? Shouldn't we have a technocratic, meritocratic system, right? And of course, the caviar left mobilized thoroughly to have Pedro Castillo doubt the party and to say to himself, well, okay, I can either succumb to the accusation that I am an ignorant donkey Indian and I could not lead, and therefore I have to pick all these white, foreign educated, sophisticated leftists, right? And I could say, well, look, these guys, they've been to these universities, they have this pedigree, they have this good families, right? Good families, rich colonial families. So aren't I a capable president? Isn't this going to be such a great government? And, Castillo did pick some people that I think are pretty cool. I'm an educator. He picked one of the best educators in the world, like to be the Minister of Education. So I think he did pick some good people. But what he needed to do was pick people with the correct political line. A revolutionary depends on the masses and on the correctness of their line. And Pedro Castillo said, I will depend on the pedigrees and on the diplomas of these technocrats. And for any other position, I'm going to pick my Chota-based key allies. Chota is a small town in Arequipa where Pedro Castillo is from. And so he chose this, network of people from Chota to work with him. The only problem is that many of them were corrupt. His own, I think the general secretary of his office was found with $20,000 taped inside of a toilet in his office. So it does beg to question, the role of the caviar left and the Fujimoristas united. They were able to separate Pedro Castillo from the national political party Peru Libre, and that was the beginning of the end. When he kicked out Guido Bellido from the cabinet, proved, left leader and fighter, and replaced them with a caviar leftist who not only defended Repsol, there was this huge controversy. There was an oil spill in Lima, in Callao. Repsol, a Spaniard company, was responsible. And this individual, this minister, this prime minister of Peru, was siding with them. And so that already was the writing on the wall as to where the Castillo government was going to go. At the end of the day, Castillo made the huge mistake of trusting and falling for Lima and its culture of chauvinism and racist exclusion. And he thought, well, if I play the game, I might survive. He was wrong.
Yeah, I remember when he kicked off Bellido. I had done an interview with RT a few days before that, and my predictions were very positive. Like, he's going to take the radical route. And as soon as that happened, I was like, oh shit, I wish I can go back in time and change what I said, because I was so wrong.
Peru will do that to you.
Right. So a common question that you're always asked when you have to talk about Peru is the fact that, like, before Castillo, you know, they had 5 presidents in the last, like, what, 3 years or something. It was a ridiculous amount of presidents back to back to back. Can you tell us about the political scene, specifically after not after Fujimorismo, because we still have Fujimorismo, but
Yeah, but
after.
after Fujimori as
Yeah,
president, right?
right.
So he was replaced by Congressman Paniagua from it's called Democratic Action. I'm sorry, People's Action. It's supposed to be a center right party. It fluctuates. And this guy, he was in office for a few months, and he presided over a new election that still kept the 1993 Constitution. Alejandro Toledo was elected. Alejandro Toledo was a corrupt politician and a drunkard. That's basically what he's remembered for. Right now, he's in the U.S. awaiting extradition to go to prison in Peru. Yes, every single president since Alan Garcia in 1985 has gone to prison. They've all been thieves. They've all been the lowest sort of scum, except for Castillo, of course. Of course, Castillo is not perfect, but he's definitely not an Alan Garcia. Alan Garcia, as we know, he killed himself when he was being arrested. He was going to spend the rest of his life in prison. PPK, who followed him, also, I know Yantomala as well, they all went to prison for corruption. PPK was impeached precisely because corruption about him was coming to the fore, and he worked with the Fujimoristas to stay in office. But to do that, he had to promise that he was going to pardon Fujimori. But then it was leaked that he had done an act of corruption to cover up another act of corruption, and he got impeached anyway. His follower, his replacement, Vizcarra, he also got kicked out. Merino, who was president for 5 days, also got kicked out. He hasn't been to jail yet. He's probably going to go to jail for crimes against humanity and so on. Bermudez, who did the coup against Velasco, he also got a life sentence. I think he just recently died in prison. So all these presidents in Peru that we had, they, to pardon my French, they ain't shit. They're the worst. They're really bad. It's like the worst kind of people want to run for president in Peru, except, again, for the few revolutionary Peruvians that do participate in the electoral system. Pedro Castillo becomes president in a context of the full discreditation, the full rejection of the establishment. Pedro Castillo got 19% of the vote in the first round. That was more than everybody else. Pedro Castillo is the most popular president and politician in Peru right now by far, even though, again, a minority support him.
That's right. He has a 22% favorability, while Congress has, I think, 11% or something.
And that's high.
Yeah, right.
That's
right.
high for Congress right now.
What has been the role of U.S. imperialism in this whole really mess that's Peruvian politics?
Well, NGOs play, I think, the leading role. The caviar left feeds off grant money. The caviar left are going to be the enemies of the Peruvian Revolution always. Every time something doesn't happen their way, they're always siding with imperialism and reaction. Verónica Mendoza, who was the candidate for Juntos for el Perú in the past, and for Nuevo Peru, and for for different little left parties that I can't remember because they're so insignificant. She said on the day of the parliamentary coup, que se largue Castillo. Man, Castillo needs to get out. She joined the chorus of the coup. That's the caviar left. The caviar left threatened Pedro Castillo during the inauguration of his first cabinet that they would drop if he didn't separate himself from Peru Libre. So the caviar left was always looking for its own benefit, as always. And the caviar left is exactly the people that replaced the Fujimoristas in many parts of the Peruvian state after many of the Fujimoristas were purged from the state in 2000. It should be remembered that the caviar left have mafias, entire organizations in the Peruvian state for their own benefit. And they hated that Peru Libre would ever replace them because, remember, again, they're very qualified and they're very modern and they're very liberal. What's a peasant got to do with statecraft, right?
That's such a good point, man, because it's something that I think it's an obstacle that's presenting itself to I don't want to say the left in general, but it's something that I think we see in the U.S. We see it in Europe. There's a lot of comrades and European communist spaces who tell me the same thing. And so, would you say then that this phenomenon of the caviar cosmopolitan Lima left in Peru, what's your class position? Would you describe it with the terms that we usually use here, which is the professional managerial class?
I think that's pretty good because they're not necessarily the comprador class per se. That the Fujimoristas, I think, will be closer to that, but they are those professional managerial middle class people who mean well, but always act at the behest of their class, the petty bourgeoisie. They vacillate between the cause of the people and the cause of the imperialists. So, for example, now many of the caviar leftists that voted to impeach Castillo are saying, "Oh, Dina Boluarte, resign, Dina asesina." They're like out there, they're like, I can't believe this shit. But how come you voted to Coup Castillo? Right? That's on some AOC type shit. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, okay, I'll believe you when I see something to back it up. But every action of the caviar left has been in coincidence, if you will, or in unity, if you will, with the Fujimoristas. It is to take over the state and to milk the state. These people live off the Peruvian government. Think about La Prensa Mermelera, right? La Prensa Mermelera is what we call the far right trash Peruvian television. And why do we call them mermeleras? Because they're privately owned, but they exist through subsidies from the state. They only target the upper middle class and upper class sectors of the population through their advertisement because the rest of the money they get from the Peruvian state. They never have to cater to the working class. The Peruvian state makes up for the money that perhaps they would have gotten from appealing to a broader sector of the population.
That's very well said. So, what would you say is what are the sentiments of the Peruvian working class, which I'm guessing is mostly centered in Lima, because in the Andean regions you have primarily a sort of peasant campesino style class. So, what would you say are the political sentiments of the working class? Or do they have any? Are they disenchanted by politics? And the same question, I guess, but with respects to the peasantry.
So this is a complex question for the following reason. Most people in Peru work in the agricultural sector, either as farmers or people transporting food and so on and so on. But the majority of the GDP comes from mining. So even though the majority of the workers work in the agricultural sector, most of the money that's actually made by the imperialists comes through mining. So the proletarian core of miners actually forms a very powerful sector, which is not based in Lima, right? It's where the mines are at. How my own family from my grandmother's side comes from Jauli, which is a mining town, right? But Lima does have a working class which has some sentiments towards populism and certainly rejects Dina Boluarte, but it's not as politically advanced, if you will, as the rural South and the rural Andes in general. I do want to underscore that. And so, in a way, the sentiments are divided between you have the South, the North, and the capital. The South is 10 toes down revolution. The North rejects the status quo and wants change, but vacillates as to what that change should be. Lima, unfortunately, is mostly apathetic. It's mostly trying to worry about its own affairs, and so it creates almost like a feeling of alienation, right? When you have these masses of peasants and ronderos coming to Lima and fighting the police, and then like you have the residents who are like, oh man, traffic, bro, like they're blocking the traffic. It's a little stark to look at it. Yes, the north of Lima is populous, the outer rims are populous, and they have many poor people. But you know what? In the poorest sectors of Lima, they voted for Keiko Fujimori. So it says something about the city and the city's culture. Lima was founded where it was simply for its climate. It was founded to be the capital of the viceroyalty of Peru. Mariátegui had said it best. Lima was an aristocratic city born as an aristocrat, born just to be nice, just to be in a place with good temperate climate that looked very pretty and was comfortable for the very delicate and very needy and very important viceroyalty and its court.
Yeah, that's right. I wanted to ask, what has been Peru Libre's reaction to the events of this past month that are ongoing, and what has their political practice been like since Castillo moved away from them and towards the caviar left?
Sure. Peru Libre rejected the coup. The General Secretary of Peru Libre, Dr. Vladimir Cerrón, he said that the party would not vote for the coup. Unfortunately, some members of the party voted for the coup. It shows the lack of discipline in parliament in general. Many congressmen betray their parties all the time, and they switch parties all the time. And Peru Libre has had to struggle against that tendency. Peru Libre is now more than 13 years old, so it does have a trajectory. However, it's new in Congress. It's new in the so-called halls of power, and its members are new in having to confront the contradictions of being in Congress and receiving the many benefits that they do. In my view, one of the sources of the revisionism and opportunism of the Social Democratic Party of Germany of all was the fact that its parliamentary members were well off. Their kids were going to go to the best colleges in the country, and they were going to be comfortable for the rest of their lives. So why hurry revolution? And so, in my view, some of these members, they got comfortable. They got AOC syndrome. I'm going to keep shitting on AOC throughout, by the way. But they got the AOC syndrome, and so they decided to vote for the majority or vote with the status quo. Peru Libre, since Pedro Castillo, stepped away from the party and resigned from the party, has kept up in working with the masses to develop their political consciousness. However, it should be noted that its connection with Castillo is still held as solid by many people throughout the country. And so when Castillo does something wrong, the party kind of has to carry the fault of the president. And in fact, many people have critiqued Peru Libre for choosing Pedro Castillo. People on the left, they said, look, you chose this guy because he was popular, but not because he was ideologically grounded. So was that an opportunist error? And, the party has made several self-criticisms on that regard. I think Peru Libre is going to play a big role, a leading role in the Peruvian revolution, but it needs to gain more traction in the capital. The fact of the matter is that the working masses of Lima are captured by Fujimorismo, by Bolsonaro-style populism, by Bukele-style populism.
That's such an important point that you make about the way that participating in parliamentary structures has the sort of soil for opportunism. And one of the things that Castillo had promised that he would do was waive his salary. Did he ever get to actually do that?
Not that I recall, no. He also said that the presidential palace was going to be turned into a museum. He said that we're going to have a mandatory military service for people who don't work and don't go to school. He said that he was going to kick out all the criminal Venezuelans within 72 hours. Yeah, the man said a lot.
He did.
But I feel we should just count the things that he did, and it'll be a shorter conversation, or at least a more succinct conversation.
Well, that brings the question of was Peru Libre, this question you were just addressing, were they acting in an opportunist fashion by just using Castillo because of the popularity he gained in 2017? Because he was talking the talk before he got elected, and it seems that he ended up not walking the walk. So to what extent can you blame Peru Libre for that?
Well, the general secretary has stated before that they didn't expect to win.
Yeah.
And so Peru Libre wanted to have a good section of members in Congress and to be able to do that parliamentary struggle before it got into a higher role. However, according to Peruvian law, they have to run a presidential candidate to then run to get members of Congress elected.
Mhm.
So they have a list system, a proportional system. Usually, if I want to be in Congress, I'll donate a lot of money to a bourgeois party. They'll put me on the top of the list, and so if we get a certain amount of votes, I am automatically in Congress. The lower you are down on the list, the harder it is for you to get into Congress. Basically, Peru Libre does a system where you vote for the people that are going to be in Congress. You have your primary within the party, and so on. But Vladimir Cerrón, the General Secretary of Peru Libre, felt that Pedro Castillo would be a good candidate who would be able to pull in many voters to then look at Congress and to give Peru Libre a good sizable amount of seats in Congress. Pedro Castillo won because the establishment was completely discredited. And so Peru Libre had to handle two new situations at once. One being in Congress and the other one being in the presidency. So Peru Libre, in many ways, was extended beyond itself, and it needed to have more roots in Lima. I remember I went to the inauguration of Pedro Castillo in La Pampa de la Quinoa in Ayacucho. And I recall when at the end of the event, I was very tired. I sat down in the grass, and this policeman in a police car with a megaphone said, "There's a small child with a blue shirt and cargo shorts who is alone. Can his mother come get him?" And an hour passed. They kept making the same broadcast. I think an hour and a half passed, and they still kept making the same broadcast. I was like, damn, this kid is like missing. What's going on here? And this guy came up to the police car and said some words in Quechua, and in 5 minutes, the mom showed up. There's a huge portion of people in Peru Libre that don't speak Spanish. I've been on Zoom calls as an affiliate of Peru Libre where the whole thing was Quechua, and they don't translate. I just kind of like go, that word sounds like this word. It underscores my necessity as a Peruvian patriot to learn Quechua, which is something that obviously I have to take up.
And that's one of the things that Castillo had promised in the regions where Quechua was the main language. He said he was going to make the official language of those regions Quechua, and then include within the other regions Quechua as one of the languages that the government institutions should be able to communicate with people in. I wanted to thank here David Burney. I always like to remind people that David was our first Patreon long ago. Thank you. He says, bienvenido y gracias por acompañarnos, Didier.
De nada, y muy agradecido de estar aquí con ustedes compartiendo sobre el tema de Perú. I think you're muted.
Oh, sorry. One of the things that I wanted to ask you about, you mentioned that there's two sorts of reactions to what's going on right now. One of them are people that I believe you said from the South that want the return to the 1979 Constitution
and Castillo to office.
And Castillo to office, right? One of the things that Castillo campaigned on was the new Constitution.
Right.
So what's going on there? Because they want to return to the 79 one, but one of the big things that was like Castillo's thing in his campaign was the new Constitution. Right. So it's what's going on there?
Right. So what unites the movement against the coup government is the realization that we need a new constitution. However, in the South, they're saying, let's go back immediately to the 1979 Constitution and then call for a constituent assembly to write a new constitution. Whereas a lot of folks in Lima are happy to, in many ways, legitimize the 1983 Constitution and say, hey, let's just call for a constituent assembly now and form a new constitution. Both realize that a constituent assembly is a historical process by which a whole nation has to sit down and discuss what goes into the new social contract, to take these conversations to your church, to your tavern, to your soccer club, to your workplace, etc., and to be able to create something that the people will be able to watch over as if it was their own house. However, the question of the 1979 Constitution has to do with two things. One, the legality of the Fujimori regime and of what Castillo did. Remember, according to the 1993 Constitution, what Castillo did was wrong, was illegal. He was trying to do a coup. According to the 1979 Constitution, Pedro Castillo was acting in righteous, legal, patriotic insurgents against a despotic system that had tried to overtake the Peruvian democratic system. So there's like that differentiation, which has to do with, again, the defense of Castillo. And then the second thing has to do with the fact that the people in the South live where the mines are at. They see, they have felt, they have even lost many of the things that have been plundered by the imperialists. So they know that the imperialists are going to try to keep that land forever. And they will take Peru to international courts, and they will have the US sanction Peru, and they will do everything to keep that money flowing from those mines. And they know that the legal foundation for that theft is the 1993 Constitution, which they feel that must be delegitimized immediately. There was conversations already in the year 2001 about going back to the 1979 Constitution and declaring the 1983 Constitution as null and void. But the Congress instead merely did some reforms to the Constitution in order to keep re-legitimizing the neoliberal status quo that had been installed by Fujimori.
Right. Complex situation, indeed, and that seems to be a constant in Peruvian politics. One of the things that I wanted to ask you was, what are the Communist Party, what are their views on the events as of late? Where are they positioning themselves? I know one of them is Patria Roja, and there's another major one, but what's going on there?
Unidad's the other one, yeah.
Yeah, what is going on there with the parties?
I mean, those parties, look, I mean, and I don't want to say anything that is unnecessarily hostile, but they're mostly just focused with recruiting people. That's it, right? Oh, man, hey, fuck X, Y, and Z government. Let's go protest. Hey, you want to join my party? That's it. So I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. You should ask maybe members of that party. But of those parties, I think those parties are not too relevant to what's going on, just to be honest. Now, that's not to say that they don't have any power. Obviously, Patria Roja has a substantial level of power in the teachers' unions and so on and so on. And they've done a lot of very positive work for democracy and against Fujimorismo. But in my personal opinion, right, this is not me speaking in the name of anybody other than myself, those parties have, a long time ago, abandon any sort of mass base in order to make real change. And that includes everybody. That also includes the Sendero Luminoso, who, of course, I disagree with, and who I think have done things that are very incorrect. Even their guerrilla movement, right? What are they doing right now? They ain't doing shit. So it makes me think that these old communist parties, or the old CPs, if you will, they're not up to par at this point. And I think that eventually there will be a unitary socialist communist, inshallah, communist party in Peru, but it's going to take a process. Will it be something like the PSUV? I don't know. Maybe it'll be something like the Socialist Unity Party of Germany. I don't know. But I don't see these lone small communist parties being a key element in the struggle. Of course, they would think otherwise, right? We'll have to disagree.
That's such an interesting point, because Peru Libre posits itself as a Marxist-Leninist, Mariategist party. Can you speak a little bit about, in terms of the party itself, how does it differ from these other self-proclaimed Marxist-Leninist parties? Does it adhere to like democratic centralism? Is it a party of a new type, in the sense in which like Lenin intended communist parties to be?
I think that, yeah, the National Political Party, Peru Libre, does uphold democratic centralism. It does uphold Marxism, Leninism as its ideology, Mariategism as the application of said ideology to the Peruvian reality, and so on. But what makes it different is that it's willing to put first and foremost the demands, the very immediate democratic and national demands of the peasant class, as opposed, in my view, perhaps, to the other CPs. But I don't want to misrepresent the other CP's views. I don't think that's fair either. I think that Peru Libre has been able to do better what the communist parties have tried to do, which is to be rooted in the core working class and the peasantry. However, this is also an important caveat. Peru Libre is the biggest political party in Peru, yes. However, political parties in general are hugely discredited in Peru. So even though Peru Libre has a plurality of members, that's not enough right now to make the difference in this movement. Because remember, the movement against the coup, yeah, it's Peru Libre, but it's also many different independent groups. And those groups and their politics are yet to be thoroughly represented in Peru Libre. I think that's fair to say.
Do you see any potential for collaboration between the communist parties and Peru Libre? Or, I mean, I heard about a year ago that they were initially with Juntos por Peru.
Yes.
So are they embedded within this caviar left, or is there a potential for collaboration with Peru Libre?
You know, one of the things that made Peru Libre very different was the fact that the caviar left will say we'll never take anyone as members who have been involved in violent acts. So somebody like Hector Bejar is by definition not able to be in the caviar parties because he was a guerrilla in the MIR in the 1960s. So that is one key difference between perhaps the caviar coalitions, of which Patria Libre is a member of. Now you could say, well, maybe they were a member of that coalition because they saw no better alternative. And maybe now they'll be in a different coalition in the upcoming elections whenever they happen to be. I'm not going to judge them too much for that, right? I mean, many people were unaware of Peru Libre, even in Peru, because it was a regional party to begin with. It also should be noted that the Patria Roja people, you know, they have, I think, very positive politics, but they're also of the same social circle as the caviar left. You know, and like that's a problem that even American communism has, right? Many of its members, many of its participants are upper middle class people. And you know, I'm not gonna say, oh man, how dare you be upper middle class, whatever. But you know, it has its consequences, right? The working class is very straightforward. The working class, I think, is very practical, but it's also willing to dream and chase those dreams, as opposed to the petty bourgeoisie, which is always vacillating, which is always confused as to what it even wants or what it even needs.
Yeah, that word is so important. The vacillation of the petty bourgeoisie. That's something that we get in the Marxist-Leninist tradition constantly.
We saw that in Miami. You know, the three petty bourgeois theories or ideologies in Miami, at least, anarchism, narrow nationalism, and social democracy. We saw them at play during the 2020 uprisings in Miami. You know, that followed the brutal murder of George Floyd. We saw that these trends fought against the Marxist-Leninist trend and leadership of the movement here in Miami. So one should not be surprised to see the petty bourgeoisie always at key moments betraying the movement. That's not to say that we are against the petty bourgeoisie. There's many people in the petty bourgeoisie that I think do much great work, right? There's many journalists that do great work. But I think that knowing their class character should help us be able to integrate them in an optimal way.
Right. That was a Marxist concern already with the First International and the First International parties. I mean, you can have professional folks, you can have the petty bourgeoisie within a party. It just can't be the heart of it. And it seems to be that, at least in the U.S. and perhaps in other places as well, it's the PMC which composes the vast majority of people within the dominant left-wing socialist institutions. And that's what's, I think, the problem, the culture that creates, which is sometimes, as we've talked about it before, we usually talk about it, I would say almost every stream, which is that it creates this culture that's anathema to a lot of working people, that ends up just making working people feel like if they're engaging in HR meetings once once they go to socialist organizing meetings and stuff. So it's something that has to be combated, and there has to be combated in a tactical way, because you don't want to tell people who want to organize for socialism that they're not good enough for something, but they do have to be conscious of the fact that their class positions and the culture that emerges from the main institutions that they are constantly engaging with, the academy, the media, the NGOs, they produce a certain culture which might be alienating for parts of the working class, and that seems to be the case in Peru. It seems to be the case in the U.S., and it seems to be the case in many European countries whose communists I've been able to speak with in the past. So
yeah,
yeah.
go ahead. Well, I was going to say this. So I think that, yes, it's true that the petty bourgeoisie in America, in Peru, and so on, I think that definitely, yes, be conscious of your class, position, all that. But build a new culture through people's struggles, through serving the people. Look, I'm going to talk about America very quickly. I think that in America, the goal at this moment of having a national communist party is something that, yes, we should work towards, to amen and hallelujah. But right now we need to serve the people, to develop the people's power, to then forge a vanguard that could lead this communist party. There's too many petty bourgeois people that read some books on Marxist.org and said, I am the vanguard of the proletariat. I will now form a communist party and lead the revolution. Why? Because you read some books? My mother, she crossed the border to come into this country, and she worked many years as a janitor, 363 days of the year, from 11 p.m. to 11 a.m. I think she's got a little more qualifications than your bookworm ass. And I love books, and I read a shit ton of books. Like I could bring like stacks of books. I love it. Books is my life. But at the end of the day, also as a science teacher, I know that for you to create, yes, you should have the technical knowledge, the background knowledge, but you should also have a certain irreverence to it, a certain desire to push the envelope, to develop something new, to forge something new. Here in Miami, we have this concept called the mass organization of a new type. A mass organization that is not a front group for a party, that is there to actually win. Because the front groups of communist parties are there to recruit. That's it. That's the only reason. So we have a front organization for Black Lives Matter, for anti-racist, anti-police brutality. So if you hate police brutality, fuck around with our organization, and you're not going to change shit. You're not going to win shit. But eventually, maybe you'll join our communist party. If you're for this, if you're for that, come to my front group and so on. But that is merely a tool to what? To develop what you think should be the party because you've read some books. I don't want to go on a tangent about this very separate topic, but I think it does connect at some length.
I agree, and that comment on your mom, Lenin would agree with that. And if the people doing the book reading were reading perhaps the right sorts of texts and not the ones that the academy tells you have to read in order to actually understand real Marxism, which usually just comes out of the academy and not from the socialist experiments that were actually successful. But if these people would do their reading, they'd recognize that figures like Lenin say that you can't. Being a communist is not about remembering a series of slogans or believing in certain ideals. Simply, being a communist is something you earn, something that you earn through working with people and through gaining the masses' trust and mobilizing them in a revolutionary fashion. It's only in the U.S.
Yeah.
It's only in the U.S. and in our very individualistic culture where you could say, I'm a communist. You put a little hammer and sickle on your profile and that's it. In other places, when you say you're a communist, it implies that you're working through a communist organization in organizing people in a revolutionary fashion. So
I wish I had at hand, if you give me, well, I don't want to have to go look through my books, but I have a bunch of these Mariátegui books that were published in the 1960s, 50s. They come with the Sino-Soviet split. What do I mean by that? So until the Sino-Soviet split, the various references to Mariátegui outside of the 7 essays, which you could just buy as a book, they came from his writings that you could only get to either A, if you bought the newspaper or the magazine when it came out in the 1930s, or B, if you had a personal relationship with the family of Mariátegui, which the communist leadership in Peru did. And they had almost like an exclusive access to all these documents. And they have what perhaps some might call the authentic interpretation of Mariateguism. Because they're like, well, look, we're the leaders of the party that he founded. We knew him, literally. A lot of us were friends with him. So we're the ones, right? So when we quote him, this is the real interpretation, right? It's almost like on some Catholic priest and reading the Bible in Latin. Okay, fair, I guess. I'm not, look, I respect all the communists, all the Peruvian communists, and I could see that. But with the Sino-Soviet split and the split of Peruvian communists, the necessity came forward to really publish these works as directly as possible so that people can make up their minds about the interpretations thereof. And so in the Peruvian movement, even to this day, this exclusive access to historical documents is a thing in Peruvian culture. Even in Peru Libre, if you don't know how, certain sectors of Peruvian communism struggle with the South American Bureau of the Communist International, then are you really a Mariateguis? Right? And sometimes, I'm not gonna lie, I laugh at some of these MLMs. Not like there's many reasons why I would laugh, but they'll talk about, like Maoism. And like, if you don't understand Mariátegui, you don't understand Maoism. And they're like, wait, what? No, but I've read this Indian guy and this Nepalese. Yeah, I like the Filipino guys and all that. But Mariáteguism was synthesized in Peru. And a lot of that synthesis had to do with Mariátegui's thought. So if you think that you can skip this and understand Maoism, I have a surprise for you. You can't. Sorry. Anyway, I could go on Mariáteguism all night too.
Right, and it's such a very clear case of the fact that you need Marxism-Leninism to be applied to specific contexts. There's no such thing as socialism in general. Socialism is the content that, in order to be realized, has to be realized through a determinate form, right? This is just the basic way that dialectics, both in Hegel and in Marxism, understands what universals are. There's no such thing as ahistorical universals. Universals are always existing only through particulars. And that means that socialism is always socialism with X characteristics. It has to take up the unique characteristics of the country it is developing in. In China, is socialism with Chinese characteristics. In Cuba, it means taking up Jose Marti and the traditions of anti-colonial struggles. In Peru, it means Mariátegui, who was able to synthesize, as you very well said, Marxism-Leninism to the context of Peru. And I think this is something that we're going to have to do in the U.S. We have to bring the living spirit of Marxism-Leninism to the U.S. and have unique analysis. And, we have people in the past who have done a great job at doing that we're either largely forgetting or domesticating. People like W.E.B. Du Bois and Henry Winston, who have been tremendous figures in understanding the unique conditions of the U.S. and in bringing a Marxist-Leninist analysis to those. And our hope is to be able to construct such a space where we can begin to develop that unique application of Marxism-Leninism to our context, which I think is indispensable if we want a struggle for socialism.
I agree. I think that, we should take up national figures. I understand the United States is a real thing. People are Americans. There is an American culture and identity and all that. But personally, practically, for me, I'm looking at the history of Florida. I'm looking at the history of South Florida. I'm looking at the Seminole Wars. And I'm looking to rescue that history, that very immediate history. I remember when I was 15, I took a road trip with my family from Florida to New York. And it wasn't until we got to like northern Georgia and, South Carolina, Virginia, that we started seeing, the Civil War battlefields and all these different cities that had existed for a very long time, during the colonies, where I was like, okay, like this is the historical America. This is what I've read about. Florida is a whole different beast. Florida got added to the United States, out of nowhere. And so while I do believe in, the creation of a national communist party and so on and so on, certainly I do think that my lot in this moment for the rest of the decade is to develop a Floridian socialism. I am very much a Florida communist. Yes. I'm a man because it has, all these other connotations.
It's going to have to account for regional differences, which are very real. in which maybe other successful socialist projects, just because of us having a smaller population, didn't have as sharpened regional differences as we have in the U.S. So definitely part of having a
You know,
concrete strategy is realizing that even talking about the development of an American Marxism is perhaps a bit too abstract unless it's understood that that means adapting to the concrete conditions of different regions. And I think that's very important as someone who's been able to do activism in different parts of the country. I realize the working class from those different parts are different. They have a different culture. You approach them in a different manner, and they're able to accept socialism through different pathways. And those differences have to be accounted for. You can't just have a copy paste format. If not, you're going to
I'll
fail.
give you an example. I was having a conversation with some comrades from Massachusetts, a couple of weeks ago, and they were shocked when I told them that nobody in Florida, no, not even in the communist left or the Democratic left, party left, whatever, not a left, nobody like fought for mask mandates. And they were shocked. They were like, "What? How could it be not even the communist left?" And I'm like, "Not even the communist left. Nobody was going like, yo, we need mass mandates in Florida right now." And it has to do with the fact that that would have alienated us from the vast majority of Floridians. It would have been the stupidest thing. It would have been at the service of imperialism for us to say, "Oh, Dr. Fauci, follow Dr. Fauci." So if the movement, in again the North, right, if it has a different characteristic and people take the question of coronavirus differently, um, that's fine. I'm not saying better because I don't think being a liberal that follows Dr. Fauci and submits to big pharma is better, but different. I respect that too. But I think that Florida and various parts of America will have a socialism that is very much rooted on the immediate, and should have a socialism that is very much rooted in the immediate desires and demands of the people. And that's not. Listen, I'm a science teacher. Coronavirus is very real. If you can get vaccinated, you should consider doing so. You should be very careful in various places where you could spread a virus, not only with coronavirus, but with other viruses. And obviously, getting enough sleep and having a correct nutrition, a correct diet is the best antiviral protection that you can take up. Just to give those caveats,
Right, right, right.
it's
It's
only
unfortunate that we
that,
have to. We
yeah.
have. It's unfortunate that that has to be done because it's a, an atmosphere for the discourse has been created that any sort of critical engagement with it, the label of anti-science just comes out, and that's very much anti-science itself. Because part of the development of science is critique and open discourse and consultation. But I do think you're absolutely right about being able to have a feel for your community. We talked yesterday with JT Chapman from Second Thought, and he said that he was asked to do a presentation by some of his friends in Texas about socialism, and he had to adjust it to the language that they understood, and that's something that we should be doing in each one of our communities. And it's part of again this way that socialism works, that if it's socialism is the universal that has to be concretized through the particular, which means understanding your communities. And that's the task of the vanguard. The vanguard is not supposed to be too ahead so that it's completely detached, and it's not supposed to be so far back that it's just tailing or just along with where the masses are. It has to be at a safe distance where it can both lead but not be so far ahead that it alienates working people. And that requires knowing your communities, not treating them in a patronizing and condescending manner. But I wanted to ask, just to roll back to the Peru and maybe finish off.
I wanted to say just this, as we roll back into Peru. I've been out here a communist for like about a decade, right? And my father is Marxist Leninist. He very much raised me in an anti-imperialist thought and all that. But even now, I don't think I'm the vanguard of the proletariat. I think I'm a student of socialism, a servant of the people. Since I've been 15 years old, I've been serving the people in various capacities in my communities. I've always said that I'm an introvert who was forced to live an extrovert's life, to always just having to speak with people and going out there. But I'm still a student of socialism. I think that the development of the vanguard of the proletariat is a historical development. And I think that it is our task in this decade to push forward that birth of that vanguard through struggle, through the mass organizations. I do again dream of a national communist party, but I think that comes from the unity of other organizations that already know how to get their shit together. But yeah,
Right.
Peru,
The
how do you?
vanguard is an organic development. You can't just call yourself a vanguard and that's it. Boom,
Yeah.
you're a
I'm the
vanguard.
party. I'm the party, guys.
Right, 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 right.
Yeah.
Again, I think a lot of this goes back to just the liberal individualism that predominates in our bourgeois ideology. You know, whatever's real is what you identify with, and if you identify as the vanguard, you're the vanguard. Um, and
Yo, you just killed it with that one. Whatever
there's
you identify as, that's what you are. That's on some like idealist subjectivism, right? Like,
it is it is
I am what I think. Yeah.
it's what it is at its core. And you know, we can get into I think the philosophical assumptions underpinning that, but I think it would be healthy for our to keep the conversation limited.
I know,
To,
I know. We could all,
it's gonna
yeah,
be very hard, but we're an hour
yeah,
and 15 in, and I want to try to wrap up with perhaps the most difficult question, which is
yeah,
where the hell is this going? Where do you see this going? Where's, you know,
yeah.
Peru going? How are these events
Oh,
going to unfold?
where is Peru going? You know what? At the risk of, being proven wrong by tomorrow, I believe, according to the information at hand right now, I think that we'll have elections in 2023. I think Pedro Castillo will be released from jail after those elections. I think that after those elections, we may have a Congress that's willing to have a constituent assembly. Now, that's me being optimistic. That's me being more optimistic than the comrade General Secretary Vladimir Cerrón, who's would tell you, look, we've had this movie already happen. We have new elections, we vote for a right-wing Congress. We have new elections, we have a right-wing Congress. And we have new elections, and we have a right-wing Congress. And we have these endless elections with right-wing Congresses. Let's have a constituent assembly right now. Let's vote on that referendum right now. The big question then is not so much if we're going to have elections in 2023. I think we definitely will. Imagine I might be wrong, right? But the big question is, will we have a referendum on the Constituent Assembly? I don't know if we can go back to the Constitution of 1979. I mean, I don't know. Like, I guess the army would have to be able to say, well, okay, we will support that. They're not going to. They're all Fujimoristas. The army is a caste of people, of families, right? It's not, you can't have a Chavez, perhaps, right? Like go up the ranks or whatever. Velasco was the last big mistake, right? Now they're like, no. You have to be my cousin or something to get into this position. I don't give a fuck about your merits. It's all about, are you loyal to our clan? And Peru had clans and all that, but I don't want to get into those analysis right now. So elections, yes, perhaps a referendum, and perhaps, or rather, the freedom of Castillo, very much possible. Who will win the next elections? You have Antauro Humala, who got released from prison recently. Of course, he made a mistake, right? He recognized Dina Boluarte as president. He was heckled in Lima. They had people throw bottles at him, literally leftists, people that were there to support him when he said, oh, President Dina Boluarte, they just booed him and threw bottles at him. But who is more popular? Certainly nobody in the right wing. That's also true. There is no right-wing candidate today that hasn't been burned out. This guy named Porky, that's his nickname, Porky. He gave himself that name. He became mayor of Lima. And in a way, he kind of destroyed his presidential ambitions because he's just going to burn himself out as a shitty mayor of Lima, like all of them. And that's it. There's no X factor like, oh, he might be a good president if he's a shitty mayor of Lima.
Yeah, I like that you played it safe by phrasing it all as belief. I've learned that to predict Peruvian politics is to beg to be proven wrong by history. But yeah, I think those things you said are very much likely. I wanted to note something that I forgot to mention earlier, which is that they're holding Pedro Castillo under what they're calling preventive detention. Mm-hmm. One of the strange things is that under preventive detention, you're not supposed to have an official sentence time, and they're giving him 18 months. So it's supposed to be something that you wait until you can have a trial and then have the then you give the sentence time. They're giving him 18 months while he's in preventive detention. I don't know if that's something that's specifically legal in Peru, but in
Well,
most of the
yeah.
world, that's not the case.
Well, the thing is that he was supposed to be liberated about a week after he got arrested, and the day before he was supposed to be liberated, or freed from prison, he spoke at a live streamed hearing, where they were presenting his basically his claim that he shouldn't be in jail because he is president, he has certain immunity, and he even said in the live stream, I call on all my people to come out tomorrow to join me at 2 p.m. when I'm released, and we're gonna do this and that. And that really scared the shit out of them, because they're like, oh man, this guy might try to march on to the palace with all his supporters. So they say, okay, no. We're gonna add 18 months to your 7 days. Can they do that? Yes, they can do that. The reason being because it's very hard to convict a president. Even though all of them have been convicted, it takes a while. Keiko Fujimori is supposed to be facing 30 years in prison. Has her trial begun? No, it hasn't. In fact, there was a huge fire in the place that housed many of the articles of evidence against her. Why? We don't know, right? And many of these files were lost, right? So the whole judicial system in Peru is corrupt. It's led by the APRA party and their mafia in the judicial system. It's all rotten. Again, only the worst people in Peru want to be in office in a way, of course, with the exception of the revolutionary Peruvian patriots, right? But apart from that, bruh, like they're all pieces of shit. I'm not even gonna lie to you, because they come from a case system. They really believe that they're superior, and that includes the caviar left. They really believe that they're the ones. How could a peasant, how could an illiterate burro, as they would say, lead the country, right? They even and this is people who are progressive. I mean, you had one of the caviar leftists. I mean, okay, I don't want to even get into that. They're racist. Let's put it that way. They're very racist people.
Which is paradoxical, because they're the ones with the woke liberal cosmopolitan, upholding the woke liberal cosmopolitan values, but in the way that they engage with the campesinado and the popular segments of Peru, you can't call those attitudes something other than racism. Before we go, is there anything that you would like to plug?
One last thing that I did definitely want to promote is, there's been different fundraisers for the struggle in Peru. Right now, we don't have one to share, but we'll be sharing that with y'all, very soon. The people that are headed to Lima, that are going from the jungles, from the Andes, they have to fight their way to Lima. They had to go through checkpoints, through militarized zones, and they're getting there, but they're finding that they need logging, and they need food, and they need hygienic products. And so there's a lot of fundraisers to help people get what they need, whether it's pillows, blankets, toothbrushes, a meal, a cot, whatever is needed. People are mobilizing. Peruvians throughout the world are mobilizing to do that. And so as soon as we have that ready for you, I would like to definitely share with your viewers and with other outlets, because it's very important to internationalize the struggle. If Peru wins, you know that Peru has enough natural gas to power the country for 500 years? You can't embargo Peru the same way that you could embargo Venezuela or Cuba or Nicaragua. We have a lot of wealth. We're on some Russia shit. We had a lot of wealth. You can't just shut us down like that. And because of that, winning Peru for the international revolutionary movement would be a huge W for the whole world, especially Latin America. So $1 can make a huge difference. $1 can help feed one peasant that has a conviction to fight for what was due to him for centuries.
Absolutely, man. That's a beautiful way to end it. As soon as you send us all that information, of course, we would be more than happy to share it. Thank you all for watching. Thank you, Didier, for coming on. And I think it's been a very insightful conversation. And we'll stay on the lookout for the events in Peru.
Patria o muerte.
Venceremos.